Hi everyone. As you know, on Monday morning we had to say goodbye to the head of the Witmer family, Gary. During this difficult time, you want to spend it with your family and grieve the loss of your loved one. Unfortunately, we're not living in a perfect world right now, and Gary would want us all to put our health and the health of those most compromised first. So instead, we're going to be gathering in small groups of family right now instead of one large group. But I still wanted to talk about this great man and share with you all my memories and stories I have with him. I'm sure you know me, but for the ones that don't, I'm Kate, and I had the pleasure of being Gary's daughter in law. But I kind of felt more like his daughter, and I think he probably felt that way. I met Gary back in 2007 after talking to him on the phone like once. This was 2 months before my wedding with Dennis, and he was looking for a new home. And of course, we welcomed him into ours because no matter what, you're always there for your family, even if you haven't met them yet. When he arrived in Kingston, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to call him. And I went to shake his hand, and he was like, "Oh, come on, let's have a hug." And this started our 14-year relationship. He was really good to have him around. He always took my side in arguments and basically told Dennis that he was never right because he told him it was easier to admit that he was wrong than to fight. I learned early on that he could be very spontaneous. One grocery shopping trip, he came home with a new computer. The next trip, he came home with an SUV. I have to say my favorite spontaneous act was when he decided to take a trip around the world by patio hopping in downtown Kingston. Dennis and I joined him. Gary would say we covered Texas at the Lone Star, Ireland at the Toucan, and Mexico at Mexicali Roses. This was such a fun day, and it's one that I will keep in my memories. Dennis and I got married in September, and Gary welcomed me to the family, saying that I would regret it the rest of my life. Of course, he was joking. Either way, I think you're all pretty good folks, so I have no idea why he would even think that. As we all know, Gary had two beautiful families, Danny, Dennis, and Nathan, then Mackenzie, Alex, and Zach. Yes, he had a different relationship with both groups of kids. Over the last 14 years, he worked on building a friendship with Dennis and Nathan. I think it ended up being a pretty good father-son relationship in the end. Back at the beginning of our marriage, Dennis and I joined a bowling league, and Gary was our third. I know Dennis really enjoyed doing this with his dad. And I'm a horrible bowler, but Gary kept trying to help me and told me to have fun with it. He also spent a lot of time with the other boys as they had their own youth bowling league, and Gary was very active with helping them with that. Not only did he mean a lot to his children, he meant a lot to other people's children. He drove school bus for a company called Stover's soon after he moved to Kingston. He drove for about 3 years, and he would bring home countless homemade cards and gifts. And at Christmas, even though he was a diabetic, he would be loaded down with chocolates and Tim Hortons gift cards. We moved to Amherstview in 2009 because we were expecting our first child. Gary moved along with us. At the time, he started working for Coach Canada. Looking through pictures, I was so happy he had that job. It allowed him to travel around Canada and the US. In 2012, after our second child was born, Gary decided to move back to Kingston and live on his own. He came back in 2016 when he no longer worked for Coach Canada because of health concerns due to diabetes. He went back to school bus driving, this time for First Canada Student, and there were a new group of children for him to make an impact on. I loved listening to the stories he would tell me about the kids. He knew all their names, he knew if they were struggling or having problems, and he was always willing to help. There were little kids, like a little girl named Madison, who would be mad if Gary had to take a day off because only Gary was allowed to drive her school bus. 2018 arrived, and that was a rough year for our family. Danny passed away due to cancer, and Gary got diagnosed with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, a disorder of the lungs that has no cure. Even when faced with all of this, Gary had faith in science that he could qualify for a lung transplant. Fortunately, the following years confirmed this would not happen. This past February, we learned that Gary was in end-stage heart failure, along with end-stage lung failure. Even then, he continued to fight to enjoy any kind of quality of life he could. He was able to come back home to us, but unfortunately it was short-lived. A month later, he returned to KGH in respiratory distress. This time, unfortunately, Gary had reached the point of needing more care than we could manage at home. He did not want to scare his grandchildren, and he wanted them to remember him in a happy way. He moved into the Windsor Retirement Home in Amherstview. The staff there are amazing and caring, and they adored him. They all shared their grief with Dennis and I, including his roommate Bill. They told me he loved visiting at the nurse's station and flirting. He and Bill had some good long chats about the good old days. This made me so happy, as I was so unsure about him going there. Gary didn't have many friends here. In the last few months, I'm happy to know he made so many. Gary was a lot of things in his life. He was a son who was extremely proud of the single mother who worked hard providing for her children, also the son who would get in trouble for not getting a haircut. He was the big brother that tormented his much younger siblings, which he did right until the end. He was the dad who went bowling with you, took his young sons to baseball games. He was the patio hopping party animal. He was the grandpa who loved to snuggle new babies, who got many FaceTime calls, and he always supported my son Casey's artistic abilities by saving anything he thought could be turned into a priceless piece of art. He was the bus driver loved by many other children and their parents, and a friend to his fellow co-workers. He was the father-in-law who drove my butt around while we blared Bon Jovi and Alice Cooper. He was the guy who comforted me back in February when we got the bad news and told me it was okay for me to not be okay, when I should have been comforting him. He was a comedian, a flirt, and an all-around joker. He made nurses and PSWs laugh wherever he went, even up until his last day. I told the nurse that day, thank you so much for being here, doing this job. It's so hard, I can't imagine having to do this every day. She even cried with us and said he was a wonderful guy who wanted to be so busy in life and yet he didn't get the chance to be. And that he was sweet and funny, which was hard because usually her patients aren't awake, and he was, so she got to talk and visit and get to know him some. I know I will miss him in our home. He was my sounding board, my person to vent to. I would take my kids to school, then come home and visit with him till he napped or watched TV. When my kids return to school eventually and my house is quiet, I think I will miss him then. But I know he is watching me. He is watching all of us, and he will still find a way to let us know he's around. He will still find a way to let Dennis know that he's wrong and I am right. I have tried to add some humor, as that's the way Gary was. But in all seriousness, I know we are all hurting and struggling with this loss. But Gary, as that day, I told him he was a champion and that he fought long and hard and that it was okay for him to rest. And now that he is resting, he's no longer in any pain. He is with Grandma, Danny, and Grandpa, watching us all smiling. I like to think heaven is full of our favorite things. I bet Gary is fishing or bowling, maybe playing golf. I hope he isn't wearing his pineapple Hawaiian shirt and straw hat, because he will know then that I had donated them to Goodwill. Anyways, in closing, we will all get through this horrible time of loss together. We all have the example of strength that Gary showed us. We too can be strong and comforting for each other.